I'm Rabbi Solomon Grunwald of HEA, and it is really an honor and privilege to officiate today along with my colleague Cantor Goldstein, formerly of HEA and now at BMH, and Cantor Kuttner, a close friend of the family and a Holocaust survivor like Lotte himself. It is our privilege and sacred duty to be here with you all today, and thank you on behalf of Lotte's family for being here to show your support. We'll begin the service with a selection of psalms and readings, and I invite Cantor Goldstein.
You'll hear a lot about Lotte today. She was my buddy, very special lady. But I remember Kurt, when they were together. Kurt used to love sitting on those chairs up against the window in the courtyard when we came out for Kiddush. And with his heavy accent, he always used to tell me how beautifully I sang and how much he loved my singing. And it's just amazing to me how long Mom went on without him and represented their family. She will be missed very much. I'd like to open with a little bit of Eshet Chayil, which means a woman of valor is how we translate it, but Chayil means a soldier. And our wives, our mothers, the women in our lives go to battle for us. And when you hear about her life, you'll see how she went to battle. Eshet Chayil mi metzal verachok mi peninim michra batach balev bala v'shalal lo echsar mizmoret David Adonai roi lo echsar binoter sheyarbitseni al menuchot ינעלני נפשי ישואף ינחני ומגלה צדק אוי למען שמו גם כי ילך בגץ על מוות לא ירא רע כי אתה עמדי שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני תערוך לפני שולחן נגד סוררי תשענת בשמן ראשי כוסי רוויה אך בחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי ושבתי בבית
A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, giving me repose in green pastures, leading me beside the still waters. He restores my soul, guiding me in straight paths, for that is God's essence. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my foes. You've anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. The psalmist speaks of the valley of the shadow of death. Lotte Heimann traversed that valley more than a few times with her family, and now you must walk that path in the shadow of death. A time that can feel dark, a valley that can feel narrow. But we as a community are here to stand with you, to walk with you that path, to assure you that in time the valley will open up and light will shine again. The book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, attributed to King Solomon, says, "A good name is better than fragrant oil, and the day of death better than the day of birth." It's a strange proverb. It's not intuitive. But the sages interpret this to mean that when a person is born, it is like a ship leaving port. Who knows what its destination will be? But when a person leaves this world, it is like a ship that returns to port, having gone on an amazing journey. We are privileged and blessed to have known Lotte, to have learned from her and her life, and today we are here to celebrate a life, an extraordinary life, a life well lived. The next proverb in Ecclesiastes says, "It is better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting, for that is the end of every person, and a living one should take it to heart." Again, an enigmatic proverb. Why is the house of mourning better than the house of feasting? After all, we all like a nice party. But there is something much more powerful in the house of mourning. We come here today to learn some of the deepest truths of life, truths that Lotte exemplified, her and her husband Kurt, in their life and their journey. Leave us, as you as family and all of us, an incredible set of lessons and wisdom that really teach us some of the deepest truths of what it means to be alive. And so we come here today to learn, and we will have a great lesson today, I know, from those who are speaking, beginning with Lottie's daughter, Gigi, and I invite her at this time to give us her eulogy.
Just want to thank you all for coming today. My mother, Lotte Grunfeld Heimann, survived her childhood losses, the Holocaust, and the adjustments of a refugee's path to China and the United States by virtue of an indomitable spirit and a very sunny disposition. Lotte was born on September 3rd, 1918, and she was named Leah for the great matriarch. This is a role that she would fulfill just as proverbially as her biblical namesake. Lotte's parents were Leo and Erna Grunfeld, and they had emigrated to Berlin from Tarnów, Poland in January of 1913, 5 years before Lotte was born. Lotte was the youngest of her siblings. There was Gisela, Adi, and Mary, and her parents were tailors. And tragedy struck very early in Lotte's life. When she was just at the tender age of 5, her father, Leo Grunfeld, suddenly died of a Jewish form of hemophilia. And that left her mother, Erna, a poor Jewish widow with 4 children. But the community, and the Jewish community especially, they rallied around her. And their house and their apartment became a long-term Shiva house with people coming to call and socialize. And that made the youngest, Lotte, very socially adept. Now, this could have resulted in a child who was spoiled or felt entitled with all that attention, but no, Lotte learned to pay it forward. Lotte, at the age of 14, was poised to complete her 8th grade. It was April 1933. Lotte was extremely popular, as you can imagine, with her teachers and classmates alike. And then shortly before her graduation, Hitler was elected, and his laws dictated the ostracism of Jews. And suddenly, all those people who adored Lotte turned away. She became a pariah, a persona non grata. And her aspirations to become a gym teacher and possibly even to compete in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin were dashed. So she became a jewelry apprentice, and she began working at a very big department store. It was called Heimann Tietz. At Tietz, Lotte met a fellow apprentice. Her name was Betty Abraham. And Betty said, why don't you come over to my house one night, and I'd like you to meet some friends. And the date was January 3rd, 1936. On that night, Lotte met her husband, Kurt Heimann, the cousin of Betty Abraham. At that night, Kurt was smitten. He immediately was entranced by her, and he asked for a date that very night. And they decided in 2 days that Lotte would ride her bicycle from the east, and Kurt would ride his bicycle from the west, and they would meet at the Brandenburg Gate. And there, Kurt once again fell in love. You see, Lotte was beautiful. She was charming. She was vivacious, but most importantly, she was very athletic. And Kurt loved to go on bicycle rides in the regions outside of Berlin and go for walks in the woods. And Lotte was the perfect partner. She was 17, he was 23. 2 years later, in September of 1938, Germany declared all Polish Jews stateless. That meant that Lotte was subject to the rules of whatever the German government wanted as a Polish Jew. And that wasn't good. So Kurt marched himself to the government offices and said, please do not take this woman's papers away. I will marry her in 2 weeks, and she will get my Hungarian papers. So on October 14th, 1938, Kurt and Lotte, dressed in black suits, strolled stylishly to the Standesamt. People whistled as they sauntered down the street with a bouquet of roses. But there was no rabbi, and there was no chazan. There was no chuppah, there were no groomsmen. There were no bridesmaids. Only alte Schnecken, old stale sweet rolls that Lotte's family had gathered up to toast the young couple. And that union lasted 67 years and 3 continents. 3 weeks after they were married, Lotte dressed in a pink suit, and she headed off to work at the jewelry store, where it was her job to open the gates of the store in the morning. The date was November 10th, 1938. And as Lotte unlocked the metal gates, all of the glass from the window shattered and cascaded down upon her beautiful pink suit. The store was called Minoga and Book. It was a Jewish-owned jewelry store, and it was the target of vandals on the pogrom of Kristallnacht. There was blood all over Lottie's suit and hands, and some people rushed to help her, and other people said, "Do not help her, she is a Jew." By December 1939, Lottie's mother, her older sister, and that was Mary, and Adi, and the little niece, Honey, had all emigrated to Brazil. Her most eldest sister, Gisela, with a little son, Leo, they remained in Berlin because Gisela had married well, and the family owned knitting factories, and she just didn't want to uproot herself because she was worried about what would happen. Unfortunately, what did happen was that a few years later, she and her son were deported to Kovno, Lithuania, where they were shot by the Einsatzgruppe A on November 25th, 1941. By early 1940, Lotte explained everyone had left. Night after night, Kurt and Lotte, her brother-in-law Gerhard, and her in-laws Yetka and Illis retreated into an air raid shelter. And one morning, Lotte woke up and said, "We've had enough. I'm taking a walk to Kurfürstendamm, where all the embassies are." Her first stop was the Japanese embassy. And there she requested, and she got 5 visas to the Japanese section of Shanghai called Hankou. But the oceans were now full of mines, and they couldn't get to Shanghai by boat. And that meant they had to travel overland. They had to traverse many countries, including Russia. That was a problem, because they were considered Hungarian citizens, and Russia was at war with the Axis of Hungary and Germany. No go, except for someone like Lotte. You see, Lotte knew many of the officials at the Russian embassy because she worked very near there, and they came in and sometimes frequented her jewelry store. So she bravely entered the Russian embassy and said, "I need 5 transit visas." And who would say no to Lotte? She got them. My father said, "That's enough for today. Let's just go home." And Lotte said, "Nope, we have one more place to go. We have to go to the Manchurian embassy because we can't get to China without Manchuria." He said, "Okay." Well, she got there just as the embassy was about to close. It was a stroke of courage, luck, and very good timing, because as she put her foot in the door, she was the last European Jew to get transit visas to Manchuria, because the Jews of Harbin were deluged with European Jews and they couldn't support them anymore. They requested no more transit visas to Harbin. But Lotte got them just in time. And underneath each request, she had placed a bar of chocolate. It was the chocolate rations that she had saved up for months for this particular moment. And as her brother-in-law Gerhard said, Lotte saved our lives. On September 16th, 1940, it was a Sunday night, and Lotte and Kurt, her brother-in-law Gerhard, and her in-laws, they reported to the platform in Berlin. And they were about to board one of the last trains going east with Jews bounded for freedom. After that, the Jews that were going east were bound for the killing fields. When they arrived at the Lithuanian border, an SS agent checked their papers, and Kurt looked a little uneasy. And the officer frisked Kurt, and he found a 5-mark piece in his jacket pocket. And he looked at it and he said, "I will have to detain you." And Lotte flashed her big blue eyes at him, grabbed his wrist, and shook it till the 5-mark piece landed on the train tracks. And she said, "Can't you see that this man made a mistake and his papers aren't in order?" Who would say no to Lotte Heimann? So he shoved her and he shoved Kurt in the train, and the doors closed. And Lotte Heimann had saved Kurt Heimann bravely again, the Eshet Chayil. So on October 16th, 1940, they arrived in the port of Shanghai aboard a transport ship called the Qingtao Maro. And they were loaded onto trucks and sent to a warehouse. It was called Pinglingheim. And they were assigned to this place to live in a warehouse until they were assigned to another warehouse called Sewardheim. And that is where they began their 8-year survival in the Shanghai ghetto. They subsisted on a diet of tea and polished rice, and that was available through the communal kitchen that was supported by the American Joint Distribution Committee. The rice usually came with worms, which they considered an excellent source of protein. But the rabbis told them they should eat the worms, even though they aren't kosher, because the rabbis said, Kinderloch, tivos de mist, aber haltzoch beim Leben. Children, do what you must, just stay alive. So Kurt got back to his family trade. He set up an upholstery business, repairing carpets and couches for the bars that the sailors frequented who came into the port. And Lotte, of course, was his assistant, sewing and fixing upholstery, and then she delivered the upholstery and cushions on a little bicycle called a sailing saw. And in this way, they were able to supplement their meager rations, and they developed a fluency in the Shanghai dialect. At the height of the war, August 31, 1943, Manfred Leo Heimann was born. As millions of Jewish babies and children were being murdered in Europe, this little boy lived. And he was the apple of everyone's eye. He had long, beautiful curls and blue eyes and a personality to beat the band. And he could speak in so many languages. Now, once the war was over, and the Emperor Hirohito capitulated in August of 1945, the Americans came in and life took a big, sharp upturn. And one day, Kurt and Lotte went to see a movie. It was called When It's Springtime in the Rockies. Kurt said to Lotte after the movie, you know, if we ever get out of here, that's where we'll go, the Colorado Rocky Mountains. So on April 27th, 1948, their ship did come in. They had received an affidavit of support from Lotte's ever-sustaining, lifelong ally in survival, her cousin, Margot Grünfeld-Schaffrin, and Margot's gallant hero husband, the American serviceman, Richard Dick Schaffrin. So Kurt, Lotte, and Manfred boarded a troop transporter called the General S.S. Gordon, and they bound for San Francisco. Now they were overcome with emotion as they first glimpsed the bedazzling Golden Gate Bridge. The date was May 12th, 1948, and that week coincided with the establishment of the State of Israel. After a 3-month acclimation to the United States, the Heimanns boarded a train to Denver, Colorado. And when the train stopped at Union Station, Lotte looked around, and she told Kurt, I will not stay in this cow town. Lotte was not going to stay in this cow town. She was used to bright lights and big cities. But the Denver Jewish community absorbed them. The Heimanns were set up on the west side of Denver on Osceola Street in the basement of the editor of the Intermountain Jewish News, Robert Gamzee. And they were welcomed with typical refugee assistance, pots and pans. A year later, they resettled in the basement of 1371 Utica. And soon, they were joined by other Greenas, the refugees who had survived Auschwitz, Majdanek, Terezin, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, and the forests and towns of Russia. No one spoke of the horrors that they endured or the miracle of the survival. They plunged headlong in creating a new life for themselves and for their children. And as Lotte said, knowing she was coming to the United States, that day was the best day of her life. In December 1953, Illis Yetka Gerhardt emigrated to the U.S. from Israel, and they came to join Manfred and Lotte and Kurt once Kurt and Lotte had become U.S. citizens. And then, on December 29th, 1954, I was born. And my mother decided to name me Gisela, and it was for her sister, who who had perished in the Holocaust. But of course, my brother decided we gotta lighten the tone, and he named me Gigi. Well, Lotte was a very happy-go-lucky mom. And why not? She was no balabusta. She really hated cooking and cleaning. But what she did love to do was exercise. And so she started her day, along with Renee Goldberg-Leventhal, with Jack LaLanne. And they had a beautiful exercise regimen. And when Jack LaLanne retired, Lotte continued with her own exercise regimen, and she walked around Sloan's Lake and the Highline Canal and kept her slim, trim figure. And then, even when she was 80 years old, she took Bruce on the basketball court and did that for a long time, too. So she was very, very, very happy-go-lucky woman. In November of 1984, Lotte and Kurt moved to Windsor Gardens, and they made lifelong friends there in the building. Lotte would hold court in the lobby, on a park bench, in the laundry room, and they had a really wonderful community there. The key to Lotte's survival throughout her life really was her optimism. And she said, things will always get better. And she stuck it out and toughed it out until they did. She also had a very important credo, which was, make the best of it. And throughout the challenges she faced, she realized that she could either lament her circumstances or make the best of it. She was grateful for what she had. She knew how to count her blessings. She was always satisfied. So I asked her, how did you make it when she was 96 years old? And she recapped and she said, well, it took courage and sticking together. She was strong, but most importantly, in the context of mutual loyalty and devotion. Lotte was an extrovert. She could strike up a conversation with anyone at any time. It didn't matter if it was a restaurant or a restroom, a grocery store or an airport. She would always be able to create a conversation that was constructive. And there were no barriers. It didn't matter if you were young or old, the same religion, different race. There were no barriers. It just didn't matter. Lotte gave compliments very generously. She was a delight to be around. She would always bring out the best in everyone, and she always knew how to put people at ease. After a few minutes with Lotte, everyone's step would be a little lighter and smile a little brighter. For Lotte, being around people always made her feel better, and being around Lotte always made people feel better. And at the end of the day, I would always find the most reassuring thing I could do, or any time of the day, would be to talk to my mom, because she was always philosophical and insightful. All of her life's lessons, she boiled down for me in a couple of wonderful expressions or chokhmahs, and it would send me on my way. Now, a testament to Lotte's diplomacy was her close, constructive relationships with her in-laws, with her brother-in-law Gerhard, with her son-in-law Mark, with her daughter-in-law Mary. My husband was known often to say, you know, some people marry for money, and some people marry for looks, some people marry for status, but I married Giselle for my mother-in-law. And these relationships thrive through all adversity because my mother had a very important policy. I never mix in. And she didn't. She never provided any unsolicited advice or opinions. And her reward was her spectacular, devoted daughter-in-law, Mary, who there are absolutely no superlatives that could describe her. And my mom appreciated her every moment of her life. Well, Lottie's recipe for a life well lived had several important ingredients. Number one, go to shul every week. Number two, make a happy home. Then appreciate all the little things. Be a minimalist and get by on less, especially food. Do not dwell upon things that make you upset, Lottie would always say. Laugh and smile with sincerity as much as possible. Exercise to stay fit. Keep a structure to your day. And love yourself. My mother was a true Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor. And may her legacy of a life of optimism, resilience, and loving kindness amidst the greatest of life's challenges and adversities be a light unto the generations. Thank you.
Beautiful and eloquent, Giselle. Thank you very much. We now call upon Dick to share a few words with us.
Good morning. And a good morning it is, because I thank God that God blessed my mother with 100 years and 5 months and blessed you all with the bonus years you could be with her also. That makes it a great day. What makes it sad is that I won't get my mother's kisses anymore and her love. But she was a special, special woman. And trying to get this put together for the few words I wanted to say, I just couldn't get there because the last 2 weeks have been tough weeks. Even though it was very peaceful for her, it was certainly unsettling for all of us. But she lived life peacefully with kindness, and that's how she left, peacefully with kindness. To get these words together, I had pages I wanted to write and say. There's so many things. I could be up here for days talking about my mother, the things she did, the cute things she did. So both my lovely daughters, Nicole and Alyssa, they helped me last night put this together to the late hours of the evening. And to show the impact my mother has on people, we put this together, had to get it printed by the hotel. And he must have read it at the time when he did it. And this morning, the hotel staff and the fellow who did it for us last night stuck a card under the door. The sympathy and what a pleasure it was. So again, she always had this way of reaching everybody, even when she was already gone. As you know, we were members of this congregation for 70 years. We came in 1948, and 70 years ago, we were part of it. We all got bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah here, and got married here. Lottie, what a mother she was. My mother was my mother for 11 years, only my mother, but also my playmate. Then my sister Gigi came along, and I had to share her. So at the time, that was tough to do. But she grew up to be a wonderful woman, and with this wonderful eulogy she gave, I guess it was a good thing she had another child. And I thank her for everything she's done for her mother, to sustain her also. My mother was a gifted athlete and loved all types of physical activity. She would take me to the parks to play on the rings, bars, and play tetherball and tennis. She never really played those games as a child in Germany. She did everything else, but those games were not German games. But actually it took me a number of years, and she picked them all up, for me to beat her. She always felt, but tennis she really started excelling at, okay? And so then she was so proud to say, my son is the captain of the tennis team at North High School. Her support of my endeavors throughout my life was not only a great motivation to me, but a source of pride for both of us. When I would call my mother on the phone, as I did many times because I missed her voice, Even as she aged, she would tell me who of my friends she saw at the JCC and the Alliance and everywhere in town that she went. And she'd tell me about their grandparents, their parents, their kids, and how they were doing. She knew what grade they were in, where they went to college already. I couldn't keep up with those people, but she kept up with everybody. She was never nosy. She was never inquisitive to people. She was open and a great listener, so people gladly shared their nachas with her. And her unbelievable memory kept it all straight. My mother was the quintessential optimist and assisted me all my life to look forward and not backward. If I came home complaining, she didn't want to hear excuses, but instead to help me solve the problem. And again, being the good listener she was, we got through it all. In business surveys, and when business surveys are taken, called likability studies, if my mom's score was used as a top benchmark, then the benchmark would have to be lowered. Okay, it's expected that might happen for other people. But the question is, why was she the one that was so likable and so special? The answer is quite clear to all of us. Simply put, my mother was relatable. From my childhood friends and their extended families, my teachers and my employers, my business partners, to my children's friends and families, when they greeted me, it was rare they didn't ask about my mom. I always said, gosh, is it me or is it my mom you like? She always left an impression on everyone that she met. To top it off, she always, again, like I said, remembered everybody's name. I couldn't do all that. And then she had that ability, when something came up of importance, and the executives in the company that I'm with, the top executives, we kind of got that through them, that if something important came up, use my mother's terms, we'll see. My mother would say, will see. That means, hey, slow down a minute. It can't be that tough right now. The soup is never eaten as hot as it's cooked, in other words. And when Gigi, as a child, would have these things she wanted to do, or what I wanted to do, there was something that she might be worried about, she knew to say, we'll see, because why get an argument about it? Because whatever Gigi and I did, we probably wouldn't be doing it anyway. We would never, ever want to embarrass our families. But still, we had to say those things. It was part of being kids. But she would, will see, it's okay, don't worry about it. And that same will see became the fabric of the company I'm with. And everybody kind of said, yeah, Dick, we'll see about that. Yeah. And it really helped, I think, even the company to slow us down sometime from taking the steps that we shouldn't be taking. She would take care of her great-grandchildren, playing, feeding them, disciplining them like only Omi could do. And Mom's discipline is why people loved her. With her, she didn't have judgmental things to say. And disciplining, wasn't yelling and screaming, to kids. And the grandkids, they don't want to go somewhere where the grandparents or the parents are, doing those things. But my mother had the ability to say, we don't do that, okay? No, don't do that now. No, I talk to you later about that. She just could, she could soothe you down for those things. And the kids responded to that. And they loved to come to Omi's house. My girls loved visiting my parents because they spent quality time playing hours of rummy cue, taking walks on the canal, baking, singing, and dancing. I remember also on our west side, we had a neighbor, Mrs. Goldberg, and her family. And she was telling my mother one day, and told her many times, that what my wife Mary, telling my mother that she was so good to her in-laws and to my grandparents, that because of what she did, she would get the blessings of a wonderful daughter-in-law to take care of her. And she got that reward with my wife Mary. And they loved each other dearly. And my mother considered her a second daughter. Mary and I, my mother, all shared a wonderful relationship with my mother. And Mary provided once-in-a-lifetime care to her. Even though we had 24-hour care for my mother, that wasn't enough for Mary. She had to go every single day, rarely missed a day, Was there for hours, being sure the caregivers did it right, be sure my mother had the right things in her little apartment and stuff. I mean, for 3 years, that was her passion, to do that. I can't imagine anybody else doing what my lovely wife did. So I've been blessed in my life to have wonderful girls in my life. You know, my mother started that wonder off. You know, my sister, my wife, and my grandkids. So it's been a wonderful life, and it's been a blessing to have such a mother. As her son, I will forever cherish the unique bond my mother and I had. And I could feel it even on the last difficult days of her life. What a mother she was. I'll never forget her. She'll always be in my heart and brain. Thank you.
We now call upon Bruce Ratain, Lottie's grandson.
My name's Bruce. I had the privilege to be Lottie's grandson. And what everyone said is true. There are too many stories to tell. But there are a few things that have stuck with me that I wanted to share. The first thing that came into my life through Omi was her love of the outdoors. Albeit in Chicago, it's a little harder to find that, but that love of the simple things and of taking a walk in nature and of that being all you need to be happy came straight from my Omi's hikes in the German countryside. But you know, that German personality of hers manifested itself in some kind of funny ways, I think. Every trip we took to Omi's apartment in Denver, for as long as I can remember, involved a covert operation. We would have to convince Omi to go out with a friend or for lunch or whatever it might be, so that our whole family could secretly clean her apartment for her and make sure we had time to put every single item back exactly where it was, because Lord knew she would notice if it wasn't. You know, growing up, I always kind of thought, wow, that's a weird, German sort of OCD kind of personality trait, that everything has to be where it is, don't mess with my stuff. But thinking more about it, I realized there was kind of another layer to it that was very Omi. It was she didn't want anyone else to put themselves out for her. She wasn't one to say, hey, can you clean my apartment for me? She was the giver. But what that story also showed me is that even independent Omi, who would never ask you to do something for her to reach 100, it did take a village, even if she didn't know about all of it. Between my parents, Uncle Dick and Aunt Mary, all of her family, Omi's unbelievable caretakers, both here and in Oregon the past few years, that village is what got her where she was, and she won those people over to want to help her that much. I always found it interesting what Omi cared about in her house, the possessions that mattered, and the things that didn't. I remember, I'll never forget, growing up, one time we were having breakfast at Omi's house, and she pulls out a can of frozen orange juice from the freezer, and I'm pretty sure I saw that the expiration date was in the early 80s or something. And she plops it in a pitcher and pours water on it, and I'm sitting there like, Mom, is this space food? I've never, frozen, I didn't even know what that was. And it kind of smelled like alcohol by that point. And I think she could see the look on my face, and she goes, "What? There's nothing wrong with it." She was mostly right. But I think for Omi, I mean, that taught me, growing up as fortunate as I did, that you don't always need the fanciest food, or you don't always need everything to be perfect. You make do with what you have. What also struck me, though, is what Omi and Opie did keep in their house, the possessions they did cherish. It wasn't fancy things. It wasn't comforts for themselves. It was reminders of all of the places they had been, all of the experiences they had had together. And their home was filled with pictures and trinkets from trips that didn't mean anything when you looked at them, but meant so much for the memories that it brought for them. As you've heard, Omi was the most dedicated and disciplined person I know. You've heard about her exercise habit. And I remember staying at Omi's house in college when 10:30 was an early wake-up time for me. And at 6 in the morning, from the next room, I would hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going, like, who's up at this time of the night? 6 in the morning. And it was Omi and my mom doing their calisthenic routine every single day. And I think Omi kept doing that. I mean, even a few years ago, I felt lazy going to visit her. But while I haven't fully adopted that practice in the way perhaps I should, the other thing she did religiously was lit Shabbat candles every week. And to think with everything that had gone on in her life, even as she wouldn't remember everything else, that there were no excuses. That was a part of who she was. That was a part of her tradition, and that carried through, and that really stuck with me. You know, what all of us probably remember most about Omi was her personality. And on the one hand, she was strong and a little bit scary if you were doing the wrong thing. I remember growing up when we would be arguing with our parents about something, Omi would come and say, "What are you doing?" And we were done. But at the same time, she wasn't just this strong, intimidating person. She was one of the most playful people I've ever met. Well into decades when maybe you wouldn't expect that. I remember just a few years ago, we'd always dance with Omi in the living room. And one time, I don't know why, but not only are we doing the traditional dances that I didn't really know how to do, but she starts shaking her hips. And I said, "Omi, you've got some moves." She says, "Well, I was young once too, you know." So I don't need to think much more about that, but she was always making jokes and being funny and connecting with people, and she kept dancing all through her life. I also want to acknowledge that I too think about how many years she lived after Opie, her husband, passed away. And I'm wearing Opie's old watch and I believe the cufflinks he wore at Uncle Dick's bar mitzvah today. And I like to think that now the two of them are finally back together and he's here with us today as well. When I think about what I've learned from Omi, it's kind of to be two people at once. On the one hand, Omi always taught me to hold myself to a higher standard and to never make excuses and to always make time for the things that are important, but at the very same time, to always slow down, to appreciate everything, always make time for a song or a dance or for a walk in the woods with the people that mattered most. Perhaps most of all, when Omi met my wife Hannah and when she saw the video of our wedding just a few months ago, she had the same reaction, which was, "I can tell there is a lot of love involved." She didn't say, boy, Hannah's really pretty, or, she seems really smart. Love is what mattered. Connections with people, relationships. That's how she lived, and I think that we really see that here today as well.
Thank you, Bruce, Dick, and Gigi. I just have to say as an aside that it's been really an honor for me to get to know you as a family in these last couple of days. To see the love between you, Gigi, and Dick, you have such an affection for one another as a family, which makes me feel that is a value that you learned from your parents. And it's beautiful to see two adult children who have that kind of love for one another and a love that you share for your parents. And Bruce, I also called my grandparents Omi and Opa, and what I remember of Lotte and her accent reminds me so much of my own grandparents too. So thank you for sharing those stories. Lotte was, as we all know, Lotte was a refugee and a survivor, and her story was recorded on a number of occasions, and it sits in the National Holocaust Museum, as well as other archives of Holocaust survivors. Among the other things that Lotte did was record music, songs that she sang. And we're grateful to Susan Brody of Family Legacies Videos, who compiled some of these video clips and will share some of them with us today.
Ich will bei euch a Kasche fragen, sucht mir, wer es kennt. Mit welche teure Vermögen wünscht Gott aller Men. Man kauft das nicht für kein Geld, das geht mir nur umsist. Und doch, als man verliert das, so wie Tränen man vergisst. Es Feten gibt man keinem nicht, es hilft nicht kein Gewinn. Oi, wer es hat verloren, der weiß schon, was ich mein. A jüdische Mame, es ist nicht besser auf der Welt. A jüdische Mame, oi, wie bitter, wenn sie fällt. Wie schön und lichtig ist im Haus, wenn die Mame ist da. Wie treurig finster wird, wenn Gott nimmt ihr euch vollkommen Habo. Durch Wasser und Feuer, und sie gelaufen bei ihr Kind. Nicht halten ihr teuer, das ist gewiss der größte Sinn. Oh, wie glücklich und reich ist der Mensch, was hat, als schöne Matone geschenkt von Gott. No hakitschke jüdische Mame, 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 Mame.
Ja, danke schön. Das war very, very nice. Bist du schön, bei mir hast du recht, bei mir bist du schön wie die ganze Welt. I can sing Bella, Bella, and even wunderbar. Each language only tells me how grand you are. Please let me explain. Bei mir bist du schön, bei mir bist du schön wie die ganze Welt. Bam, bam. Wunderbar. הייתה צעירה בכנרת אשר בגליל כל היום הייתה שיררת שירת ובגיל כל היום הייתה שירה שיר אחד שירת ידע כי הייתה צעירה בכנרת.
Show me how you exercise, Mom.
Und right und left und right.
Uh-huh. Very good. How long have you been doing this?
Oh, I would say close to 90 years.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Lottie. Happy 100th birthday to you. Happy 100th birthday to you. And many more.
I mentioned before that we come to the house of mourning to learn. When I think of when I had the opportunity to read a longer biography of Lotte, and it's a beautiful story. And what came to mind as I read were the lessons that she taught us. Pirkei Avot, the wisdom of our sages from the 2nd century, says, "Who is wise? One who learns from all people. Who is mighty? One who conquers their impulses. Who is rich? The one who is happy with their lot. Who is honored? The one who honors all people." This proverb, this teaching, reminds me of Lotte and the lessons that we learned from her. Who is wise? The one who learns from all people. Lotte was an intellect. She was a thinker. She was a person that was genuinely interested in other people. She had a judicious way of speaking. She measured her words. That is the mark of a truly wise person, someone who learns from others, and Lotte spent her life learning from other people. Who is mighty? The one who conquers their impulses. Over and over again, Lotte showed fierce determination to save her family, to bring her family to this country, to raise beautiful children and grandchildren with the values that she held dear. She was a survivor. She was disciplined, resilient, and even-tempered. Who is rich? The one who is happy with their lot. This is probably the most powerful thing that I learned about Lotte. Having been through the kind of adversity that she had been through, having faced down death in Europe, she nonetheless was not bitter. She was grateful for what she had. She understood a deep lesson of life, that whatever life presents you, that you have a choice. You have a choice to deal with the circumstances that you have, to make the best of the situation, to make the best of what you have. And she really lives up to this teaching. One who is rich is the one who is happy with their lot. And finally, who is honored? One who honors other people. She was generous, charming. She loved people. She put others at ease. And she was a person of deep faith and loyalty. Loyalty to her family, loyalty to her community, and loyalty to her religion and to God. We have these amazing lessons to learn from Lotte Heimann. She will be missed by her beloved children Dick and his wife Mary, Gigi and her husband Mark. She will be remembered as a loving grandmother by Nicole and her husband Robert, Alyssa and Eric, Bruce and Hannah, and Jonathan. May her memory endure and her legacy be passed on to her great-grandchildren Kylie and Adina Polis and Jacob Sachs, as well as the generations to come. May her story be told many times, so that her family and all who knew her share that story with others, that we all might learn from it. May the memory of Lotte Heimann, Leah bat Eliezer ve'Esther, serve as a blessing to her family and to all who knew her. May she be reunited with her beloved Kurt under God's sheltering presence, and let us say amen. In a few moments, we'll conclude the service with a memorial prayer. I want to let you know that family will be receiving visitors following interment today. Actually, I'm sorry, not immediately following the interment, but starting at 4:30 to 7:30 today and tomorrow, with a Shiva Minyan at 5 p.m. on both evenings. That will be taking place at Lotte's home in Windsor Gardens at 9355 East Center Avenue, apartment 5C. There's more information that went out from the synagogue, as well as that you received from the mortuary. In a moment, Feldman Mortuary will give you instructions to Mount Nebo, but at this time, it's my pleasure to call upon Cantor Kuttner to recite a memorial prayer for Lotte, and I'll ask you all to please rise.
Eloi Salichos Chanan Verachum Erech Apayim Verab Chesed Hametzich Apuras Pesha Vakarvas Shesha Omenucha Nechona Al Kanefu V'yashechina B'mahalos Kadoshim Adeverim Shezovar Harakiya Mazhirim Ezinishemas Hoisholeya Basel Yezer Veyester She'alecha le'yoelomo Anabal hurachamiyim Zachir lo letova Kol zechu yosei V'tzidik hoseya Be'artzos achayim Ufusach ela Sharei tzedek ve'yovera Sharei chemla v'chanina Be'seiser kenavecha Hastireya le'yoel amim V'tzroyer achayim et nishmusah Adonai ho nachalusa Vesnuach beshalom al mishkavo V'nomar Amen.
Elohai Selichot, God of forgiveness, you are gracious and compassionate, patient and abundantly kind. Grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure. To the soul of Lotte Heimann, known in our tradition as Leah bat Eliezer ve'Esther, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that you remember all the worthy, righteous deeds she has performed. May our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May Lotte's soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace, and let us say Amen.
Sim, professor.